Donovan Hark slid the settlement folder across the conference table, the way he slid everything, like the gesture itself was a conclusion. He didn't watch it land. He was already looking back at his phone, at the texts accumulating from Nadine about a site visit he'd rescheduled twice, and when he finally set the phone face down and looked at his wife of 8 years, his expression was the expression of who believed the hard part was already over. "The number's generous," he said. "My lawyers made sure of it." He wanted her to know he was being reasonable. That was important to him, that she understood he was, at the end of everything, a reasonable man. Sylvaine Leclerc looked at the folder. She didn't open it. She looked at her husband across 11 months of knowing this was coming, and 6 months of quietly making sure she was ready for it, and she said, "I'm sure it is." Then she folded her hands in her lap and waited for his lawyer to begin. If you're new here, subscribe to Ivory Secrets and drop your city in the comments right now, because this is the story of a woman who spent 8 years being treated like background noise, and what happened the day she finally decided to be heard. Don't look away. Donovan Hark was by every visible measure successful. He'd built Hark Development Group from a single property flip in North Vancouver into a firm with 43 active projects across British Columbia and Alberta. His name was on award plaques. It was in business profile. It was on the side of 3 condo towers in Yaletown in raised brushed steel letters that caught the afternoon light at a particular angle. He was the kind of man who entered rooms like he'd already assessed them. He met Sylvaine at a fundraising gala for affordable housing in 2016, which in retrospect carried a particular irony. She was standing near the edge of the room with a glass of mineral water, watching the crowd the way architects watch rooms. Not looking at the people exactly, but at how the people moved through the space, what the room was asking them to do, whether it was working. He thought she was shy. He'd been charmed by it. In the early years, he was right to be charmed. Sylvaine was thoughtful and precise and funnier than she let on, and she had the kind of curiosity that made conversations go longer than anyone planned. She asked good questions. She listened in a way that made you feel like whatever you were saying actually mattered. Donovan, who spent most of his professional life in rooms where people were waiting for their turn to speak, found her attention extraordinary. He proposed 14 months after they met. She said yes without hesitation, and he would remember that later, the lack of hesitation, and wonder what she'd known then that he hadn't. What she knew was this: she loved him, genuinely, without condition, with the full weight of a person who didn't love lightly. She knew she was walking into a life that would ask her to be quieter than she was, to take up less room than she needed, because Donovan's life was built around Donovan. She chose it anyway because she believed real love was worth the accommodation, that it would stabilize, that the version of him she could see, curious, occasionally afraid in a way he only let her see, would be the version that stayed. She was right about the love. She was wrong about what he would do with it. The gala that changed everything was in October, 2 years before the divorce. The Architecture and Sustainability Awards, held at a hotel in downtown Vancouver, where the chandeliers were original and the drinks were not. Sylvaine had worn a dress she'd bought herself, dark green silk, simply cut, and she'd been quietly pleased with it. She'd thought walking into the lobby that she looked like herself, which was the thing she rarely felt at events like this. Donovan had glanced at her in the elevator, the way people look at something peripheral. "Nadine's going to be there," he said. "She found out about the Cascadia shortlist. She's excited." "That's great," Sylvaine said. He looked at his phone. The elevator opened. She spent most of the evening near the window tables, with a glass of wine she barely touched, watching her husband work the room with Nadine Gould at his elbow. Nadine, who was 36 and sharp, and wore her ambition openly, like jewelry, as a deliberate statement. She watched Donovan tilt his head when Nadine spoke, watched him laugh at things Nadine said, with the full, unguarded laugh he used when he wasn't performing. She watched him be the version of himself she used to get. She left early. She said she had a headache, which was not quite true and not quite A lie. She took a cab home and sat in the kitchen with the lights off in the rain, doing what Vancouver rain does in October. Patient, relentless, covering everything, and she called her mother. Diane Leclerc was 64 years old and lived in a house in Saint Lambert that smelled like cedar and coffee, and decades of accumulated good sense. She answered on the second ring. Sylvaine. Her mother always said her name like it was the whole sentence. Maimon. And then, because she was 38 years old and sitting in the dark in a kitchen she decorated herself, she told her mother the truth. All of it in the careful, precise she told truths, not looking for rescue. Just for the weight to be shared for a little while. Her mother listened without interrupting. That was a gift. When Sylvaine finished, there was a long silence. Then Diane said quietly, "You already know what you're going to do." "I know." "Are you ready?" Sylvaine looked out the window at the wet garden. At the Japanese maple she'd planted their first year in the house. Bare now, which would come back. "Not yet," she said. "Give me 6 months." What Donovan didn't know, what no one at those galas knew, what no one in his professional circle had ever thought to ask, was what Sylvaine actually did. Not what she told people she did. What she actually did. She told people she consulted on sustainable design. Freelance. Project by project. She said it with the mild, apologetic brevity that married women in certain rooms use when they sense that whatever they're about to say will be assessed for how it reflects on their husband. She said it, and then steered the conversation somewhere else, and people let her, because they were more interested in Donovan anyway. The truth was that Sylvaine Leclerc had, 11 years before meeting Donovan, founded a firm under her mother's maiden name, Mercier Studio. She'd started it in a shared workspace in Montreal with 2 other architects and a client list of 3. By the time she married Donovan, the firm had 40 employees and a reputation in green building certification that serious people in the industry recognized. By the time she left that October gala early, it had 112 employees, offices in Vancouver, Toronto, and Lyon, and a project portfolio shortlisted for the Cascadia Prize. The award Nadine had been so excited about, on Donovan's behalf, at the very event where Sylvaine stood alone near the windows. Mercier Studio was shortlisted for the Cascadia Prize the same year. Hark Development Group had submitted a proposal for a mixed-use waterfront project, a proposal that had moved through the city's Green Building Review Committee with unusual smoothness. That committee had an informal working relationship with Mercier Studio. No one had connected those 2 facts, no one had thought to ask why, no one had wondered, when Sylvaine attended Donovan's industry events as his wife, what she was actually seeing. She was seeing everything. She spent her 6 months the way she spent most things, quietly and completely. She untangled every thread, connecting Mercier Studio's goodwill to Hark Development's projects. She documented what she'd quietly facilitated over 8 years. Not for a lawsuit, not for leverage. She didn't want leverage. She wanted a clean separation, to walk out of her marriage without a single invisible filament, still running between her professional world and his, because what she was building next needed to stand entirely on its own. She called Thierry Bouchard, who had been her business counsel for 9 years. He was 58, methodical, and had the particular quality of very good advisors. He didn't tell her what to do. He asked what she wanted, listened to the whole answer, and helped her make it real. "He's going to offer a settlement," she told him. "Almost certainly," Thierry said. "I'm not taking it." A pause, calibrating, not surprised. "Then what are you taking?" "My name," she said, "and a clean exit." The law offices were on the 22nd floor of a building in Cole Harbor, with a view of the water that Donovan had chosen deliberately, because Donovan chose things deliberately when he wanted them to communicate something about him. He was already seated when Sylvaine arrived. He had his lead lawyer with him, a man named Garrison, who charged $800 an hour and had the disposition of someone who had won more than he'd lost and didn't particularly care which one you were. He had not brought Nadine. That small restraint, Sylvaine noted and said nothing about. She came with Thierry and a young associate named Pascal, who said almost nothing and watched everything. Donovan looked at Sylvaine when she walked in and felt, just briefly, before his expression composed itself. Something moved through his chest without a name. She looked different, not changed, more like herself, which was a distinction he couldn't quite articulate. Her posture was the posture of someone not bracing for anything. There was a quality in her eyes he hadn't seen in a long time. Stillness, not the defeated kind, the other kind. He covered it. He was practiced at covering things. Sylvaine, he said, professional, measured. Donovan, she said, and sat down. Garrison slid the settlement portfolio across the table. He walked through the figures. The number was, as Donovan had said, generous, the Kitsilano condo, a cash payment, the car. Sylvaine let him finish. Then she looked at Thierry. We'll be declining the settlement, Thierry said pleasantly, opening his own portfolio, with the unhurried ease of someone enjoying himself professionally. My client has no interest in financial compensation. No property, no cash transfer, no structured arrangement of any kind. A pause. She'd like the marriage dissolved, clean today if workable. The room went quiet in a particular way. Garrison blinked. Donovan stared at her. The condo alone is worth. I know what it's worth, Sylvaine said. Then why? Because I don't want it. Donovan looked at her, really looked, and felt something shift in the room's air, not dramatically. The way a room changes when a sound you'd forgotten, you were hearing suddenly stops. He had been certain for 8 years that he knew her. She was steady and kind, and occasionally frustrating and not particularly ambitious, and she was good at noticing things he missed. He had valued that, once. Later he had filed it away, categorized it, decided it was the full accounting of who she was, and stopped looking. And now she was sitting across from him, declining $240,000, without blinking, and he did not know what to do with that. He did what he always did when he didn't know what to do. He moved forward. Fine, he said, let's proceed. He signed. He pushed the document toward her. She picked up the pen. She didn't sign Sylvaine Leclerc. She signed Sylvaine Mercier. The pen made a quiet, unhurried line across the page. She capped it and set it down. She looked up. Mercier, Garrison said. He was looking at the signature. His voice had gone carefully neutral, which in someone of his experience meant the opposite of calm. That's correct, Thierry said. The room was very still. Donovan said, What does that mean? No one answered him right away. Pascal closed her portfolio, rose, and walked out of the room without a word. In the hallway, she took out her phone and made a call. It lasted 53 seconds. Donovan was still at the table, staring at the signature. Sylvaine Mercier. He turned it over the way you turn a word in a language you almost recognize, looking for where it fits. He couldn't find it, because the story he'd been telling himself for 8 years had no place for it. What followed didn't happen all at once. It happened the way a crack moves through ice, quietly at first, then everywhere. By late afternoon, Donovan's development director had forwarded him an email from the City of Vancouver's planning office. A senior planner he'd worked with for years, someone who had, on 3 separate occasions, moved HARC development projects through green certification review, with unusual smoothness, was requesting a meeting to revisit the parameters of the pending waterfront proposal. By evening, a partner on the East Side mixed-use project had flagged some uncertainty around the sustainability certification timeline. By the following morning, an architecture firm in Toronto that had agreed to co-submit with HARC on a federal housing tender had quietly withdrawn. Donovan stood in his office and did the math. He was good at math. He had always been good at math. The math didn't add up to anything he recognized. He called Garrison. Mercier Studio, Garrison said, without preamble. Sylvaine Mercier is the founder. 100 and some employees, offices in 3 cities, significant reputation in sustainable design. And from what I can tell, several of your planning approvals moved as smoothly as they did because of informal relationships that originated there. A very long silence. She never told me, Donovan said. He heard the inadequacy of it immediately. Apparently not, Garrison said. In 8 years she never, he stopped, started again. How is that possible? I think, Garrison said carefully, that's the question you need to sit with. He sat with it. He thought about every event, every dinner, every morning, looking for the moment where something should have been visible and wasn't. He found it, not in a single moment, but in 100. Every conference where someone approached Sylvaine, and she deflected with, "Oh, I just do a little consulting." And he had never once thought to wonder why she deflected. Every time someone mentioned Mercier's studio in his presence, and she said nothing. Every night she'd worked late at her desk in the study, and he'd knocked to say good night without registering what she was working on, because he'd already decided what she was. He'd decided she was quiet, steady, and not particularly relevant to the professional world he moved through each day. He had looked at her for 8 years and seen what he expected to see. She had let him because she'd wanted something different from him, not professional recognition, not acknowledgement of her work. She'd wanted him to see her, the actual person, without any of the rest of it informing the seeing. He hadn't. That was the true accounting, not the planning, relationships, not the contracts. Those were consequences. The cause was something simpler and more damaging. He had looked at his wife every day for 8 years and believed he was seeing her clearly, and he had seen almost nothing at all. In St. Lambert, Sylvaine sat across from her mother at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she hadn't touched and a quiet that felt, for the first time in longer than she could locate, like peace. "I didn't orchestrate it," she told her mother. "I just stopped." Diane looked at her daughter over her reading glasses. "And how does that feel?" Sylvaine thought about it honestly. "Like taking off something heavy," she said, "that I'd worn so long I stopped noticing the weight." Her mother reached across the table and covered her hand, said nothing. That was enough. 2 weeks later, Sylvaine Mercier, publicly, formally, under her own name for the first time, announced that Mercier's studio would be launching a new division dedicated to affordable and indigenous housing design across the country. 3 projects in northern British Columbia, in partnership with First Nations communities, 1 in Winnipeg, 1 in Halifax. She thought about the settlement number, the $240,000 she'd declined. She matched it out of her own account and sent it to a fund supporting Indigenous women in the construction trades. She didn't announce that part. It wasn't for announcing. The industry conference happened 8 months after the divorce. Future Ground, Vancouver, a hotel. On the waterfront, 3 days of panels and morning coffees and the particular choreography of a professional world deciding what it valued. Both their names were on the program. Sylvaine knew. She'd known for a month. She registered anyway because the alternative was a smallness she was finished with. Donovan knew. He'd considered not attending. He went. Because avoiding it was something the old version of him would have done, the version that moved through rooms assuming they already belonged to him, and he was working, imperfectly, on not being that version anymore. He saw her on the second morning. She was coming out of a session on net zero construction standards, talking with 2 other architects, gesturing in the specific way she gestured when she was making a structural point. She was mid-sentence. She looked entirely at home. He waited until she was alone before he approached. That itself was new. "Sylvaine," he said. She looked at him, a half second of something, not quite warmth, but the direction of warmth. Before her expression settled into the same openness she had always offered him, and that he had consistently failed to return. Not cold, not kind, honest. "Your session yesterday," he said, "the biophilic integration panel. I watched the live stream." He paused. It was extraordinary. She looked at him steadily. "Thank you." "I mean it." He held himself to continuing. "I spent 8 years not knowing what you were building. I'm not saying that to excuse anything. I'm saying it because I want you to know that I know. That I understand, now, what I was looking at and didn't see." She was quiet for a moment. I didn't hide it to punish you, she said finally. I want to be clear about that. I hid it because I wanted to know if you'd see me without it. Just me, the actual person, separate from any of that. A pause. For a while, you did, and then you didn't. And by the time you stopped, the reason had nothing to do with what you didn't know about my work. It had to do with who you'd decided to become. He didn't defend himself. There was nothing to defend. I'm sorry, he said. A real one, not the kind that's actually an explanation. Something moved across her face, not forgiveness, exactly, not in that form, but something adjacent to it. Something human and unperformed. I know you are, she said. I can tell the difference. They talked for another 20 minutes. Not the conversation of two people, finding their way back to each other. The conversation of two people who had shared something real, lost it, and were deciding, in real time, what honesty between them could look like, now that the pretending was finished. At one point he said, Mercier Studio is going to be a real competitor on certain projects directly. Yes, she said simply. That doesn't bother me, he said, and then, because it was true, and because he was trying to say true things, you're going to make me better. You already have. She looked at him with an expression he recognized from a long time ago. From the early years, before he stopped paying attention, the expression of someone who has heard something unexpected and is deciding whether to trust it. That's the most like yourself you've sounded in a very long time, she said quietly. He let that land. He didn't deflect it or redirect it. He let it be true. Her colleague appeared at her shoulder. A schedule, a signal, the world, continuing. She gathered herself with the ease of someone who had stopped being divided. Take care of yourself, Donovan. She meant it, not as obligation, not as habit, but as a genuine wish from someone who had set down the responsibility of his well-being as her own, and could now, from a clean distance, simply hope he'd be all right. You too, he said. She walked away. He watched her go, not with longing, exactly, but with the particular clarity of a man who can finally see what he spent years looking at without comprehension. The clarity had come too late to change anything. He understood that. He was learning, slowly, that some kinds of clarity are worth having, even when there is nothing left to do with them, but carry them honestly forward. He went back inside. He had a panel in 40 minutes. He had a company to rebuild from the foundation up, without advantages he hadn't known he had. It was going to be hard. Good, he thought. Hard is honest, and honest is what I've been running from long enough. 2 floors up, Sylvaine Mercier sat at the head of a table with 12 people who had chosen to build something alongside her, who looked at her the way people look at someone they trust to know where they're going. She pulled up the project map for the Northern BC Housing Initiative. She asked the question she always asked first. What do you need that you don't have yet? She listened to every answer. She wrote everyone down. She was exactly where she was always going to end up. It had taken longer than it should have, because for 8 years she'd given her full attention to a man who never quite learned to return it. Some people are invisible because no one has bothered to look. Sylvaine Mercier had made herself invisible on purpose, and what she had built in that invisibility turned out to be the truest thing about her. She never needed anyone's recognition to know it was real. She only needed, finally, to stop working in the margins of someone else's story and step into the center of her own.